Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Bonjour à toutes et à tous, everywhere in the world where you would be joining us. I am delighted to join you. My name is Marusha Cardama. I am the Secretary General of the SLOCAT Partnership, and I'll be your Master of Ceremonies, or whatever you want to call me, for the next hour in this feedback session. SLOCAT and Movin'On have been partners in crime, long date partners, doing many good things together. So for me, it's an absolute pleasure and a delight to be here with you, joining one more time one of the activities of Movin'On. As you know well, due to the ongoing pandemic, the traditional Movin'On summit that was going to gather us all one more year in Montreal had to be cancelled. But here we are, moving online, staying together, all of us, and keeping alive that very characteristic brand of Movin'On, that is that collaborative and co-innovative co-creation spirit that actually embeds all the activities that are carried out in the Movin'On ecosystem. In any case, I give you already the rendezvous for next year. So I really want to see you next year in Montreal for Movin'On Summit 2021. But before we do that, obviously, and before we meet again next year, we wanted to give you a bit of an idea of what has been going on in the different ecosystem. And in this particular session, we're going to be addressing the feedback of an incredibly rich working session that took place on the 27th of May. What we're addressing here, as you know very well, as you have seen already when you joined this event, is the question of freight, is the question of what it does take to put vans and different freight vehicles on the market at the speed and at the scale that we actually need it. But before we get started, and in order to really take a moment to enjoy that characteristic governance of the Movin'On spirit, let's take a look at a video in which you will be able to see Florent Ménégo, the CEO of Michelin, Julie Sweet, the CEO of Accenture, and Patrick Kohler, the CEO of Faurecia. They're going to be highlighting to us the very strong commitment for accelerating action towards sustainable transport that permeates all the activities of the Movin'On ecosystem. Video in, please.
The future of the planet is at stake today. We already were convinced of this, and what we experience together increases the sense of urgency. Therefore, we must go even further to make people and goods mobility safer, more accessible, and efficient. We must be the generation that will pass on a more sustainable Earth to future generations. We must move forward and faster towards sustainable mobility.
Beyond the economy, the entire wealth creation for nations is at stake. Their ability to innovate, to develop, to invest, and maintain a social system that protects us all and gives us the ability to build a future for everyone.
The transport sector, which accounts for 28% of global energy-related emissions and employs close to 300 million persons, has a especially important role to play. It's about bringing real economy actors, civil society, and governments together to address a sector that, if we fail in our effort to make this sector a sustainable sector, we will not achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement.
Innovation and challenges are becoming global. Alone, we are nothing. Nations, regions, cities, companies, big, small, or emerging, NGOs, and of course, all of us, people living on Earth. We all have the duty and power to invent the world of tomorrow. We all have an essential role to play together with Movin'On.
I think it is critical that as companies, we harness that power, that agility that we all demonstrated in responding to the crisis, because innovation really cannot be done alone.
Today's fast-moving environment, and in particular in times of economic crisis, such collaboration is absolutely fundamental. We should move towards a new resilient economic paradigm, a more balanced one, not only focused on short-term financial performance, which are needed, but not only, with a model which also considers sustainability.
Today, we all have to change ourselves and to change everything.
Together, we are not only stronger, but also smarter. Collective action is the only way to foster change and have a real positive impact on people's life. And I do know that together, with your help, we will take Movin'On ecosystem to the next level.
Excellent. Well, so here it is. Here it is, an example of that shared governance that is so characteristic of the Movin'On ecosystem. Here it is, the words for innovation with a purpose, for people and planet, for positive transformation in which all of us are responsible and have to do these together. Let's keep on having a look at what happened last year when we were all together in Montreal. One of the actually strong moments of the program was when we could welcome the ambassador of the United Nations for Climate, Mr. Alfonso de Alba, who actually brought us a very clear message. He went all the way to Montreal to address the business sector and challenge them with key action, with concrete commitments for transformation in the framework of the United Nations Secretary General Climate Action Summit that was going to take place just a few months later in New York in September. The story has not ended. The message, I think, got into the business sector. You might be curious to know what was actually retrieved and what was actually, made reality by the business sector. And this is the opportunity we've got right now. We're going to have another video in which we're going to have the opportunity of listening to Mr. Selwyn Hart, the United Nations Secretary General Special Advisor for Climate Action. And let's see what has happened in the past year. Video in, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. While the impact of the COVID-19 crisis is immediate and daunting, I want to assure you that climate change remains a top priority for the Secretary General of the United Nations. This is why he has been upfront in calling for a green, sustainable, resilient, and inclusive recovery. And he's announced 6 climate positive actions for governments and the private sector to consider as they recover from the COVID crisis. Last year, the Secretary General asked you to come to the Climate Action Summit with plans and not empty speeches. He asked you to put action into a higher gear so that we can move much faster towards climate-friendly, sustainable mobility. Movin'On has done exactly that by joining the ACT initiative, Action Towards Climate-Friendly Transport, which in itself is a bold commitment made by over 100 organizations to decarbonize the transport sector. It is to be applauded. Despite the challenges posed by the COVID-19 crisis, the ACT initiative continues to make good progress, thanks to the commitment and leadership of many prominent stakeholders. I am therefore delighted to introduce the next feedback session on zero-emission freight, a still often forgotten topic in global debates. The Transport Decarbonization Alliance has joined forces with EV100, the Climate Group, and Movin'On to make vehicles for zero-emission freight more readily available and faster. 1 year after the Secretary General's call for leaders to raise their ambition on climate action, it's great to see the progress this initiative has made. The transport sector will be key to the COVID-19 response, as well as to ensure we meet our global climate goals. I challenge you to move faster and to do much more. And I also assure you that the UN Secretary General's Climate Action Team will be standing next to you, ready to support you in every step along the way. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Selwyn. Actually, this is fantastic. We are delighted to hear that the ACT initiative is still considered as a beacon for hope and for transformation. Certainly, I think we take all the challenges. It's 100 entities, as you were saying, reunited behind a motor of accelerating transformation and decarbonization of the transport sector. A lot is to come, And as Selwyn was telling us, climate change is a pandemic for which we have no vaccine. So the work has to continue, and the work ahead of us is a lot. But let's go back now to what is reuniting us here this year, 2020, online, not physically as we would have wanted. And let me tell you again, what is it, the burning question that we've put to all of you and to the very many participants over the past months. As you know, the methodology of Movin'On is very much about getting one burning question and putting the different stakeholders together to try to figure out what can be the solutions and what are the drivers for making change happen. This time around, the burning question was a very clear one. What is blocking zero-emission freight vehicles from becoming the norm? I'm going to ask our colleagues in the back, the very many hands in the technical team, to help us move on the slides so we can get to the slide that is showing us that question, and exactly, perfectly. That's what I wanted. What's been going on over the past months is that under the joint leadership of the Transport Decarbonization Alliance, EV100 from the Climate Group, and CALSTART, Drive to Zero, a lot of thinking has been going on. And as I was telling you earlier, on the 27th May, a group of 50 experts under the leadership of these three entities got together and started going into the details of what would it take to actually make this question be resolved and happened in the field. I would like to continue by giving you the opportunity of listening to the three institutional perspectives that are brought by these three entities. So first, we're going to start with a video from Wil van Amburg, who's the CALSTART Executive Vice President. Video in, please.
I think we all do know why we must act, and this is really a critical time. Freight, fuel consumption and greenhouse gases are really forecast to continue to grow, and this is because our goods movement sector is continuing to grow. This is becoming a real challenge, and I think with urban delivery, and if we'll just hold on this slide for just a moment, with COVID, we know that urban delivery is going to continue to grow, and this will put increasing pressure on air pollution and climate change gases, particularly in our urban regions. The other thing that I think is so powerful is that while these vehicles are a relatively small number on the road around the world, they do contribute a very large quantity or part of our fuel consumption and therefore climate change gases, but particularly for on-road particulates and those emissions that cause smog and air pollution in our urban regions in particular. This is an issue for a world that is becoming increasingly urbanized that we must keep an eye on. And I think what's so interesting here is it puts the pressure on people in our urban regions. They're, if you will, subsidizing this with their health. And very tellingly, diesel trucks are less efficient and more polluting operating in these low-speed environments like our city. And this is where electrification can work best. So let's really go to our next slide, because we know our focus must be changing what powers our commercial vehicles around the world. And we are seeing a real transformation when it comes to electric technology into our commercial vehicles. They really, right now, are becoming increasingly possible with the technology transfer. And if we could see the next slide, we can actually give you a sense of really what we saw in COVID was a view of our future. Blue skies around the world in many cities, the ability to see mountains, but we also, through that, realized that while our passenger car traffic went down, that was an essential service stayed high. And indeed, ozone and some of the air pollution from NOx stayed high.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Bill. A lot of facts and figures there. As you can see, colleagues are participating online. There was a lot that was discussed on that 27th May. Bill was referring to the different slides that were being shared on that moment. But what we know is that urban delivery has always been a fact. We tend to forget that a lot of the things we have at home have to come our way somehow. So freight is not a theoretical, technical notion. It's actually what allows many of us to have all the things we want to have at home, particularly in this times of pandemic in which online shopping is going higher and higher, isn't it? I think that we should also pay attention to the message that Bill was telling us about technology. The technology to make this cleaner exists. But let's continue with the institutional perspectives. And let me please introduce you now to Minister Stientje van Veldhoven. She's the Minister for the Environment of the Netherlands, and she's the chair of the Transport Decarbonization Alliance. Video in, please.
And I'd really like to start also by expressing my appreciation to the sector, because you are ensuring that we have on-time delivery of food, parcels, everything we need. So it has really also highlighted the crucial role of the logistics sector. I think in many countries, governments are rethinking the fabric of our societies. And I think the images that Bill just showed of the blue skies actually also show us what we can achieve. It's not just about wanting to do things less, it's also about what do we want more. And I think we all want more blue skies. And if you look at the contribution of transport in air pollution, then we all know that if we want to have more blue skies, if that is our aim for the future, then we will also need to have less emissions from transport. So we have a positive goal to achieve. And this positive goal is not just an environmental goal. I think this pandemic has brought the vulnerability of our health much more to the forefront. And we also know more and more about the link between air pollution and health. So I think this also provides for a setting in which the thinking about green freight should be part of this rebuilding, reopening of our societies. We should be building back better, we should be building back greener, and we cannot do that without having a clear game plan, I'd like to say, about green transport and green freight, as Bill very clearly illustrated, is where we can have the easiest gains, also in terms of public health, because it is about those inner city areas where so much of that transport is taking place and being burdensome on the health of all those people living there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Minister. Personal mobility has been a well-addressed topic in the global policy debate for many years, with a wealth of concrete initiative at the forefront. Freight, however, has received, I think we can say, relatively poor attention up until now in global transport policy discussions and in initiatives. What is your perspective on this?
Well, we shouldn't be afraid of freight, is what I'd like to say. I think previously, perhaps, people had their fears about the technology. Would it be strong enough for such a big truck, to put it simply? But I think also, if you look at the other side of it, if you start working on freight, you are working with a more limited number of participants with a bigger impact. And so there's every reason to be working on freight if you want to make progress. Trucks account for only 2% of the vehicles on the road, but 22% of road transport CO2 emissions in the EU. And I think absolutely very clearly, Bill outlined rightly, that in this context of COVID, that is even on the rise. So it's efficient and it's cost effective and it's necessary to start with zero-emission freight vehicles. And to give you an example how we've been working on this in the Netherlands, we actually saw this as, let's say, a sector where it would be easier to make progress than in other sectors. But it's only if you come to a real public-private partnership, a public-private roadmap, because we all depend on each other. And it's basically about solving a chicken and egg problem. What we have done is that we made an agreement with 30 to 40 cities that expressed the ambition to establish zero-emission zones for freight by 2025. And that means that for companies, there's a very clear incentive to start working on greening their fleet, because they know that their competitors will also be held account to the same goal. This does not only include zero-emission vans and trucks for frontrunners like DHL and IKEA, but can also include fully electric waste trucks. We already have those piloted in Rotterdam. And so we chose to start with freight because the CO2 reduction potential is very important, but also because of the air quality. And that made for a very clear support also, public support, political support for starting in those areas. But you really need the public-private roadmap because we all need each other. We all need to move in the same pace. And I fully underline what Bill said in this respect. We should now see how leader regions could also align so as to synchronize, let's say, demand on production, but also to also give an indication of how we could be developing this development towards green freight transport.
Minister, today you are opening this kickoff session where experts will explore actionable solutions on the topic of manufacturing, fleets, policies, infrastructure, and financing. Now, can you tell us, what are your intentions, what are your expectations after this kickoff Movin'On working session?
So if we start calculating backwards from 2050, when we need to be carbon neutral, that also shows us how quickly we need to start moving up speed. And we can only do that if we join forces. So I want to challenge the industry. Let's at least be able to match the current demand for zero-emission vehicles. Show us what you can do more. And let's see if at the COP26 we can commit on the side of industry to ambitious production, and on the side of governments to a clear roadmap of how they want to, let's say, purchase the production, of what their policy goals are for ensuring that we move forward, quotas, targets, however we want to call this. We need to put this on paper. We need each other. You need us, we need you, then we can move faster together.
Thank you so very much, Minister. I think that you could join me, participants, in thinking that this is the type of political ambition and the type of political will and leadership that we need to transform things on the ground. And I am sure that many of you have recognized on the video Mary Krass, who is the head of international relations and summit in the International Transport Forum. You know her from all the years she's been in this ecosystem, and also as a well-known speaker of the Movin'On summit. She was interviewing the minister. And let me just take a moment to perhaps remind us all of the words of appreciation that the minister had for the freight sector, a sector that has kept us healthy, happy and supplied over one of the historic crises that we've lived in recent times. I think it's important that we realize to what extent the work of people in the freight sector has been essential to keep us, all of us, happily supplied in our households during lockdown. The minister also referred to COP26, to the United Nations Climate Conference, COP26, that, as you know, has also been cancelled this year and postponed until November 2021. It is a bit our phare dans la tempête, our ultimate goal to make sure that the goals of the Paris Agreement on climate change are really met. And in order to do so, that private and public sectors work together, as the minister was telling them. So we are really spoiled to have now the opportunity of listening to a last video from Nigel Toppin, who is the high-level champion for COP26. Video in, please.
I want to thank you for convening these kind of conversations, because we need to have conversations around the complex transitions which we have to make. And it's only by sharing and listening to each other and problem solving together that we're going to be able to accelerate in the way that the ministers. And one thing I wanted to share is a key thing which we're going to be launching next week, actually, on the road to Glasgow, which we now know, because the document's been leaked, is likely to be in November next year. We're going to be launching with my colleague Gonzalo Munoz from Chile, something called a Race to Zero. And what we're basically saying is we have to get to zero as soon as possible. We don't have to get to zero at 2050. If we get zero at 2049, it's better, or 2048, it's better. We know every single fraction of a degree, it reduces human and economic suffering. And we're experiencing so much of that now that we should really use this as an opportunity to galvanize our commitment. And we call it a race to zero. It's a race to zero because 7 million people are dying prematurely of respiratory diseases because of air pollution right now, much of that driven by the transport sector. It's a race to zero because of getting to climate change. It's also a race to zero because this is a competitive race. This is an inevitable transition, right? We will get to zero. Those who lead will win. Those who are laggards will lose. They'll lose market share, they'll lose jobs. So whether you're a mayor who wants to be elected, a minister who wants to see your economy thrive, or a CEO who wants to see your share price rise, the incentives are all there to join and win the race to zero. And we think that this race to zero for heavy freight is winnable by 2040. And the reason we, I know in the sense of all sales being for for zero emissions vehicles, why do we think that? Look, the science, every time the scientists review the risk of a given degree warming, it gets scarier. Now we'll have the 6th report of the IPCC, at least some of the early reports, out before the Glasgow COP. We know that's going to tell us that the risks are higher than when last time assessed. So that's only going in one direction. The streets are angrier. If any of you have got teenage kids, we know that kids looking their CEO or minister parents in the eye and saying, what are you doing about climate change, mummy or daddy, is a very big motivator for change. That's only going one way. this is going to mean a tremendous amount of innovation and opportunity. It's a hydrogen innovation which needs lots of low-cost renewables and lower-cost electrolyzers. So a lot of people getting excited about that now and investment piling in. It's a fuel cell innovation fest, and of course a refueling infrastructure and the trucks themselves. Every one of those is going to go through their own S-curve. That's the way industrial transformations always happen. That means they go exponential, and if things go exponential and you're not already in the game, you can never catch up. So it's the next 5 years will determine who are going to be the winners, who are going to be the losers for the next 20. So this is the time for leaders, whether they're mayors or ministers, CEOs or investors, to step up. I totally agree with the minister's vision of a public-private partnership, collectively committing to a pathway which will allow us to de-risk and go much faster. So thank you for joining this. Thank you for this series of conversations, and I really look forward to partnering with many of you to keep building the acceleration. We've now got 18 months to get to COP in Glasgow.
Excellent. So thank you very much for that video. And I think the message is very clear, isn't it? Nigel made it very clear to us. It's a race to zero to actually stop human and economic suffering. It's a race to zero, as Nigel was saying, that in the freight sector is winnable by 2040, and it's an unavoidable transformation. The incentives are there, and the public and the private partnerships can take us very, very far together. And very importantly, as Nigel reminded us, is all about people, isn't it? We have to capitalize on that increasing movement and increasing acknowledgement of the need for the transformation that we are seeing on the streets. You might be wondering if this is the only thing that happened on the 27th May. I assure you it was not. I could be there and I could be part of the plenary sessions and of the working of the different breakup sessions. And I mean, a lot happened. It was extraordinarily rich. But in order for you not to have to just trust my word, let's go with another video in which you're going to get a bit of the making of how it all worked and what is these governance of the different stakeholders coming together. Video in, please.
Conversations around the complex transitions which we have to make.
What do we need to do to make this happen? We need to build an ecosystem to tackle the barriers. So this is the job that's before us today.
And therefore, I'm very, very happy that we are joining forces, TDA with the EV100, the Climate Group, and CALSTART Drive to Zero in partnership with Movin'On for this kickoff session. And now let's move on.
Thank you very much. Let's indeed move on. And we're going to go now into the feedback session, into the very interactive part in which we're going to tell you what happened during that, say, 27th May in a bit of detail. And have a close look at those three faces there. These are your three key people, the three lead experts who are actually making all these happen in the back from the TDA, the Transport Decarbonization Alliance, CALSTART, and EV100 from the Climate Group. It's Sita Holster, it's Cristiano Fassagna, and it's Sandra Rowling. Cristiano cannot be with us today, but Sita and Sandra, they're going to be telling you what is it that actually happened. Next slide, please. So it is important to realize that we are talking about a working session and now a feedback session, which is a bit like the first of a series of activities that have been conceptualized in order to answer that question of like, what does it really take to put vans and trucks on the road that are zero emission. That is really the goal. What happened, it's that a series, as you can see there was a series of different working groups. Let me call them breakup sessions, not to make your life a bit more complex here. So during the 27th of May, after the plenary, there were a series of breakout groups that actually addressed, as you can see there on your screen, all these different topics, and each of them was led by an expert. Next slide, please. What they did during the duration of the working session was to use digital technology and use a digital whiteboard and try to address in each of the breakup sessions a series of common questions. They addressed what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, and what are the stakeholders? Who are the stakeholders who need to be involved? Next slide, please. It was very important for the three entities and the three leaders to give the opportunity to everyone to really go through all these different topics. But I am not the expert, and I was not there in all the breakout sessions. And I was telling you that we are really spoiled to have with us both Sita and Sandra. Sandra is going to get started. The floor goes to you, Sandra, right now, the virtual floor. So you can please take us through the first two breakout sessions and tell us what was actually discussed on the 27th May. Back to you, Sandra. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Marusha. I had the pleasure of leading personally the discussion on the corporate fleets, which was really exciting because we get a great group of companies together who are already doing it. So companies from the postal and logistics sector, retailers, utilities who have service and installation fleets, and all those who are companies who already had experiences with working with integrating electric vehicles into their fleets. So that was obviously a great group to really capture what it is that's possible, what it is that excites them, and also where the challenges are that we can address together. And some of the key insights, if you can go to the next slides. The first one, I think very exciting, obviously, for the purpose of this conversation, there is a clear sense that electric vehicles are the future. So the companies want them. They have already, many of them, made public commitments to go electric. They're already working on finding the right types of vehicles on the market, and also looking ahead at what we're hearing from manufacturers, what we're seeing in the market outlooks. There is a clear expectation that more will be possible over the coming years, which is obviously very exciting. There was also acknowledgement that we still need more vehicles. We need more different models. We need all the right solutions to meet the specification requirements of companies. So we need the right payloads, the right sizes into hubs that companies have already set up at their distribution centers and things like that. And that this is a challenge and a need that we need to fill, but also from the perspectives of companies right now, they're seeing a big opportunity for them to help shape the plans of the manufacturers, to tell them what they really want, what they need, especially the companies that are already a bit more public are seeing a big opportunity where they're finding themselves being invited into conversations to comment on early pilots and models and ideas and be able to shape that. And obviously that's a great collaboration opportunity already between the manufacturers and the ultimate owners or users of the vehicles. We also talked about charging infrastructure, which of course is a big challenge, both for the companies in terms of installing their own infrastructure and in terms of the public facilities, especially for fast charging as they're moving through the countries. And again, here, I think the main theme was around collaboration, about thinking about where can companies and other stakeholders, public entities, etc., jointly invest, and where can they also plan together so that we're not doubling up on the infrastructure, but we can create a system that meets everyone's needs and where we only need to make the investments once. And the last point we had a rich discussion about are the environmental concerns that do still exist around the battery technologies, knowing that there's rare minerals that can have quite important environmental impacts, and the need to really find solutions where we can maybe reuse the batteries first when their power goes down for things like storage, but also thinking about recycling and closed loop systems and other solutions to make sure that we're being as effective and reducing the environmental impact as much as possible. And again, here, a recognition that this is obviously something that, for example, the ICT sector is already facing with our cell phones, our laptops, all of those types of things. But now with the new group in the automotive sector also interested in this space, and lots of ultimate users of fleets, companies that care about sustainability deeply and that have sophisticated systems to think about that, including their supply chains, for them to come into the conversation and really help push for properly sustainable solutions for the future. So these are the main fleet insights in a nutshell. I know we have to keep it short, but it was a very exciting discussion, especially to see the collaborative spirit between everyone. If we go over to the next session, that my colleague Cristiano Facagna from CALSTART was leading. He was working with the manufacturers and bringing together those companies that are already thinking about developing the trucks and the vans that we want. And I think some of the conversations there have been really complementary to what we've already heard from the fleets on their needs. So if we go to the next slide. Also from the manufacturers, a very, very clear sense that the zero-emission trucks are coming. And especially I want to highlight the word truck here. I think there's a strong growing sense that the technology is stronger than we might have thought even some years ago. So the manufacturers do see the need and they do have plans to invest in that area. There was a big focus on the importance of policies and incentives. And you see a bit further down in the notes also recognition that so far maybe a lot of attention has been paid more to the personal vehicles and the cars, but that there's an opportunity to really think about how policy can also support developments on the larger vehicle segments for trucks and vans. That can be incentives, recognizing upfront cost barriers, but there can also be other types of incentives if you think about zero emission zones in city centers and other types of solutions that just give an advantage to clean vehicles and also recognizes really the public damage, if you will, that the combustion engine vehicles are causing in terms of air pollution and climate and all these other things. There's a recognition that we can be strategic, that we can focus first on the fleets where the technology is most ready. So we know the buses are quite far ahead, we know the vans are quite far ahead, so we can build from what is already possible out to other models and broader models so that we have opportunities that are ready for use right now and build our experience and the excitement and the investments from there. There was also a strong theme about collaboration, again, looking especially at the regions that are already leading in the space and the opportunity for sharing experiences, making sure that not every stakeholder needs to reinvent the wheel, but that we can learn from each other. And then very importantly, also recognition, again, looking at charging, that we need to standardize requirements. I think this links very much with the theme in the earlier group about joint investments and planning, making sure that the charging infrastructure that we do develop can serve everyone and we don't end up with lots of different systems that make the user experience more difficult for every single user. So those in a nutshell were the first two conversations groups. There are three more, but I'll hand back to Marusha to pass that over to Sita then.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Indeed, so rich, isn't it? We can see how you've been covering from the regulatory and policy aspects to the technical, the institutional, and the financial. It all is all tied together, isn't it? But now, next slide, please. Now we're going to move on to Sita. Sita works in the Dutch government, and she's also been facilitating different groups and sessions that are touching upon this topic of freight in the framework of the Transport Decarbonization Alliance. Many of you have seen her over the past couple of years running this work, particularly from the TDA. Sita, you have a lot of things to tell us in very little time, isn't it? About the other atelier, about the other breakout sessions that took place on the 27th May. So with no further ado, the floor goes to you, please.
Thank you, Marusha. And yes, there is some pressure there for, describing what happened in these three other breakout groups. I was personally not in them, but I have gathered that, all the rich feedback that I've gotten from the expert leaders. So let's see the next slide, is the policies work group. So this was very well led by Ben Sharp, who is a senior researcher at ICCT. And the main question was also kind of what Sandra already said, like how do we shape these policies and what the minister said to best support this adoption of these zero emission trucks and vans. So in the next slide, you can see that kind of the main outcome was the importance of public announcements. So what we're seeing that's happening with cars is that, for example, in Europe, there's being announcements made in the Netherlands that all new cars sold have to be zero emission by 2030, and other countries are kind of following or thinking of similar things. And then we see Canada also has a similar target for 2040. And this is crucial. And looking at the signal that would send out if that was also transferred to like commercial vehicles, so zero emission sales targets within the next years, or going up to 100, how important that is to have these type of targets also for commercial vehicles, and maybe especially for commercial vehicles, especially if we link it back to what Bill said and the importance of air quality within this sector. So that came up as one of the main outcomes of this group. I would say the second is, sadly, bringing down the cost of both the trucks and the infrastructure. So it's really important to get those volumes up as quickly as possible. And I think, that might be why many of you are here today. That's definitely why those 50 people were in the working session, is because we're very committed to make that happen. Because I think everyone understands that in this curve that we are, in this transition that we are, the longer we stay in this first phase, the harder it is. Like speeding up to higher volumes is really important. And the key for that is maybe governments themselves. So the public sector, both cities, national governments, regional governments, have enormous purchasing power. So not only looking at the actual trucks that they operate themselves, but also looking at the services that they contract. That is a huge market, and governments could really lead by example in this. And it's not only kind of a symbolic importance, but it's really kind of championing the first sales and, practicing what you preach in a way, and using that procurement power and this purchasing power that governments have to speed up this market. So that was the second. And then the third is very relevant at the moment. Like as Marusha already said, as the minister said, we are in the midst of a crisis and recovery packages are being announced and released. The EU released one very recently, and there is definitely attention there for kind of clean energy and clean transport. And it's important to earmark, especially within kind of the logistics and freight sector, where the margins are very low, to earmark some of that budget and some of that recovery packaging to zero emission options for freight. And then finally, for this one, is more to do with kind of best practice policy packages. So what works around the world when we look at zero emission? So zero or low emission zones is one of the things that could be included in that. Some cities are already announcing zero emission zones specifically for freight. And within C40, for example, we see many cities announcing zero emission zones by 2030. And we're hoping that they will specifically include freight within that. So it would be important to look at, the role of zero emission zone within that policy package there. So that's the short wrap up, I would say.
That's impressive. If we could have the next slide, colleagues, that is really impressive, Sita. I mean, there's a lot in there, isn't it? From the announcements and everything. Keep us going. I know there's a lot coming. We're just a bit short of time, so back to you.
All right, thank you. So the next one, I'll try to go through this as fast as I can, is infrastructure. This has come up already in some of the other ones because it's very interrelated. That's what we see. So this was led by Dave Milani. He's the principal of industry and heavy transport at the Rocky Mountains Institute and was an excellent expert leader on this. And if you look at the next slide, it kind of comes down to the same that we just said, that it's important to improve the total cost of ownership of these infrastructures. And it's important to do that in two ways. One is, again, these good policies, but not unimportant that they are supported by good subsidies and taxation instruments, because the cost has to go down. The second is, again, the growing fleet. So the more, I think everyone understands this, the more the infrastructure is used, the better the business case for that. So the second is, again, the vision. And there I see, this coming back in all the groups, there's this scream for, give us a vision and make it very clear, but especially for infrastructure, where it maybe needs even a bit more detailed, where they say, okay, this is a staged approach. So we see urban areas already having a positive business case, maybe for some of these zero emission deliveries. But then what's the next market? Maybe some of the niche markets, and then maybe the regional corridors is next. So having a kind of common understanding from all the stakeholders what these phases are will be very important for the infrastructure rollout. So the third one, and I love how he said this is a quote, infrastructure is where worlds collide. And it's very maybe theatrical in a way, but I think it's so true, because it is almost literally where the worlds collide. You have the policy colliding with kind of the electricity world and the energy world and the transport world and the public spaces, especially in urban areas. Like, this is where it gets real. Like, where are you going to install this infrastructure in overcrowded cities, especially for freight vehicles? That can be quite tricky. So it's important to, I would say, merge three of the worlds that they identified. So the first one is the policies world, and then not just the kind of high-level vision policies world, but all levels. So you need the national, the regional, and the city level involved in this. And the second is the private sector, and this is very broad. So this includes the manufacturers, the fleet owners, the shippers, the haulers, the charging infrastructure providers, and even kind of the depot owners, so the owners of the vehicle or the buildings at the distribution centers. And the last one would be the energy world. So energy companies, utilities, of course, grid operators. These are the worlds. These three really need to kind of work together and find this common momentum to make the infrastructure work, both for hydrogen and for battery electric vehicles, which Nigel also said.
Excellent. So, well,
yeah,
Sita, we are running out of time. I need to rush you a bit.
Okay, this is the last one, I promise.
I could say from collision to collaboration, isn't it?
Yeah.
So who needs to be there? Come on, tell us. You've already been saying it, isn't it? And what comes next? Let's try to accelerate a bit. Sorry, you know, I'm the bad cop here. Sorry for that.
Yeah, I understand. Let me just go through, because I think financing is where this all really comes together.
Yes,
so Bill and Amber, you've met. And if we look at the next slide, what is crucial is reducing the risk. So reducing the risk for the investors in this is really a core thing that needs to happen. And looking at new financial approaches, where, as you said, we need to all work together to find new business models, which might be leasing, it might be transport as a service or trucks as a service. And this kind of ecosystem financing, where I think, you know, that's what we're trying to do, bringing these worlds together. That's as fast as I could do, Marusha. Sorry, Bill, for this short wrap up. Yeah.
Give us the next slide, please, our colleagues in the back. Sita, just a quick recap of who needs to be there and what happens next in the work of the TDA, EV100 and CALSTART.
Yeah, thank you. So I think it's very clear that we are looking at a systemic approach. So new collaborations need to be made in this. And I mentioned some of them already, but you know, you can see that cities in all levels of government need to be involved, energy providers with their utilities, financial specialists, and you know, private sector. And what's especially tricky there for freight is that, as we all know, and many of you may know that better than I do, is that the freight sector is already highly fragmented. So it's quite a challenge to say, you know, we have to work together. And I think that's a challenge that we're trying to overcome here. And it's something that we will have to do and that we will do to get more zero-emission vans and trucks on the road.
Excellent.
And then,
yeah, indeed, the most important thing.
I was going to say, what's next? Yeah. So what's next is, as this has already been said, this is a series that is initiated with TDA EV100 and Drive to Zero in co-chairmanship, and we will organize a series of events getting zero-emission vans and trucks on the road. The kickoff was last week. Today we're here kind of sharing what came out of that. Then we will have 3 regional events that will specifically focus on kind of the regional supply, the regional demand, and how to accelerate in that region. And that will be North America, India, and Europe. And then we will have a well-deserved low carbon footprint holiday and come back at Climate Week, where we will have kind of a high-level stock take of what we have learned so far in this series. And then all these messaging and all these events that we will continue to do throughout the year will lead up to what you mentioned, the United Nations Climate Conference, the COP26 in Glasgow, where we have high expectations for the sector.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Sita. Sorry for rushing you. Sorry, Sandra, as well, you know, to ask you to, you know, summarize in just a few minutes, say all the richness of all these months and the 27th May working session, kindly hosted by Movin'On. I know it's a tall order, but you've accomplished it. So thank you very much. So basically, the burning question, putting trucks and vans, which are zero emission on the roads, is technically feasible is economically positive and is environmentally needed. There's no other option. So this was a feedback session, but you know that the Movin'On spirit is very much about being interactive. In Montreal, of course, when we're all reunited, things get much more interactive. Nevertheless, we have been collecting questions from you participants, and I got quite a few here. So what I'm going to do, Sita and Sandra, is I'm going to read them out to you. And then I'm going to pass it on to you to decide which ones you think you can cover and you feel more comfortable with covering, in the understanding that probably if we don't manage to cover them all, there is a way to further after the event post answers and make sure that the participants can access them. So there I go. Ready on your marks, Sita, Sandra, Sita, whoever could start?
Sure. Yes.
So we got a question on local freight. Is there enough cost-effective options of electric heavy trucks for local freight delivery? So there we go, a very clear answer. We won there. The question that you were expecting, I am pretty sure. How does the COVID crisis influence this ambition and the necessary actions? Another question, how can people get involved? And perhaps to throw in just another one about the pandemic that I'm just getting through here right now. It says, after the pandemic, people will pay more attention on sanity in transportation. How do we continue promoting greener transportation solutions like shared usage? Will there be more focus on individual EVs than on freight in this case? And last but not least, because we've been constantly evoking this, the chicken and egg story, how do we boost the production of zero-emission trucks and vans? So quite a lot there, from how do we get involved to local solutions for local freight, to the COVID crisis, and will this move us backwards instead of forwards, to then production? How do we boost it? So over to you, ladies. I wouldn't like to be in your shoes, but I know you got what it takes.
All right, thank you. Maybe I'll start, Sandra, and then you can just fill me in. Is that all right? Yeah. So for the first question, is there enough vehicles available? So that is one of the first questions that we also had as a group when we started this. And one of our partners, CALSTART, Drive to Zero, have actually launched a zero-emission technology inventory, the ZEFV tool, ZETI, and it shows, and it's quite a nice interactive tool, it shows which zero-emission vehicles are already out there and which manufacturers are producing them. And what's interesting is by making this tool, we can actually also see the increase of available models that is, you know, happening now, next year, and the year after, while that tool is being updated. So I would say, you know, within freight, it always very much depends. What is the use case? What vehicles are available? And there will have to be kind of a match made for that to make sure that the vehicle fits the use case, the charging infrastructure that's needed. But there's definitely models out there already for the urban deliveries. But yeah, you know, things are growing and we have to speed up. So I don't know, Sandra, if you have something to add to that question specifically?
Yeah, maybe just I think an important thing from working with lots of companies in this EV100 initiative that are making the transition, I think it's also really important to not just focus on the upfront cost, which is quite often still a bit higher, but to think about the total cost of ownership. So you will pay more for the vehicle upfront, but you will save on fuel and also on maintenance and repair. And I think especially in city centers where you go around, you know, within a limited space, but where the vehicles are used with very high frequency, I think that's quite a big important piece. And I think the other one is looking at regulation and zero emission zones and things like that. Obviously, that's a cost factor as well. So anyone who is thinking about that, I would encourage to both look at the models that are already out there, but also in their calculations, really look at the whole life cycle of the vehicles over maybe 5-7 years, and then you will very likely already find cost savings opportunities within that as well.
Yeah, and maybe just one last addition to that is what we're seeing, especially, for example, in Asia, is these new financial models where there's leasing opportunities for these zero-emission vehicles to lower these upfront costs for the end user. So it's an exciting world where new things are popping up, I would say.
Absolutely. Well, ladies, we got 4 minutes to go, and there was more questions there. I know if you would like to pick them up. There's also another question that just came up asking if is hydrogen a real option to zero-emission heavy vehicles, considering efficiency and electricity mix. So we have this one. We have the one about the COVID. We had many others. Any other questions that you would like to pick up on, or otherwise, perhaps after the session, you could continue answering? We still have a few minutes.
Yeah. I'd be happy to go in on the COVID question. I think in terms of the opportunity, we've already talked about, acknowledging the crisis, but also thinking ahead and acknowledging there's a bigger crisis with climate still there and still relevant. And I think really, as we're thinking about green recovery, as we're thinking about how to future-proof industries, etc., just directing as much as possible towards the solutions we know we need in the long run. So I think that's a big part of it. I think on the question, about will people be scared to share transport, etc., I think this work focuses on electrification because we think that's an important part of the story. But I think we should always think about clean transport as a multimodal piece, and we need all the different modes to come together. We need people to even walk and cycle wherever they can. Of course, we need them to share wherever possible. But I think in whatever scenario we're using the vehicles, the ones that we are using, we want to be electric because that's the zero emission solution. And if I go into just the final question you just raised, Marusha, in that context as well, in my book, sort of you could think of hydrogen as an electric solution as well. If it's powered from a zero emission source or the hydrogen is generated from that. So yes, I do think that's a role for hydrogen in that as well, maybe especially in the larger vehicles. We see how it plays out, but the point is any vehicle we have needs to be zero emission, and electrification and hydrogen are the solutions that we have that will allow us to do that.
That is a very, very, very clear message. Our little technical hands in the back are telling me that we have 3 minutes to go. The chat is exploding with questions. Let me reassure participants that we will pass on these to the experts. And if you leave your email and your name, we will make our utmost to actually respond back to you. Let me throw in a last one, ladies. I think I'm going to give you, if you don't mind, 1 minute each to respond to this one. Do you see any regional, whether it is North America, Europe, Asia, Africa, expertise in this collaborative approach? In other words, what will be the role of each region to achieve these goals that we are talking about? Let's keep it super short, ladies, please.
So I think we can identify three, I would say, sort of regions. So we have North America with California and maybe in New York area as a very specific region in that. We have Europe and we have China, which is, and maybe India as well, which have very high ambitions and, very high numbers of freight vehicles already on the road. And what is important and what is the aim also of this group is to see if there's a possibility to align these, far away regions with each other, both on the policies and ambition side, but also maybe a bit on the technical and manufacturing side. So I would say it's especially important to align this region because it's transport in itself is usually a very cross-border sector. So it's important to collaborate across these borders, across these regions to make this transition happen faster.
Excellent
Sandra,
collaboration always. Sandra, I mean, you stand from a privileged point of view, isn't it, as well, working across regions?
Yes, exactly. And it's quite interesting to see if you work with international companies that the decision they might take at headquarters obviously impacts on the rest of the world as well. And I think probably the leaders right now, the key regions, some of them CETA has outlined, but I think it's also important to not necessarily presume that just one region is the leaders and the others are following. I would not assign roles in that way too much, but I think all the regions have things to learn from each other. Every single government, every single company that is looking for a solution will be learning something that's valuable for others. So it mainly make a plea for connection, for international exchange, and that's obviously what we're trying to do with this project as well. So we can all learn from what's already there rather than reinventing the wheel, because in the end we need to go faster and broader, and that's what we're trying to do.
Well, what a wonderful message to close with. Thank you very much to both of you. Let me acknowledge once again the richness of the questions and the variety of interactions that we've been having in the chat. We are not in Montreal, but at least we've been close and we've had the opportunity of working on these together. Stay reassured, the questions that were not answered, if you leave your email and your name, we will make our utmost to respond them. And I am left just with a few seconds to really congratulate the TDA, EV100 and CALSTART, and thank Movin'On for the opportunity of bringing this to you today. As you can see, it's been a working session. This has been the feedback session, and the work continues by these three entities, as CETA mentioned to you. I hope that we've been given, we have the opportunity of giving you a bit of a glimpse of the very concrete solutions that exist, the very concrete pathways and actions that we can take together in order to make this question about how does it take to put trucks and vans that are zero emission on the road a reality. So thank you very much for your participation today, for joining us. Please engage, continue following the works by the three entities, continue, of course, engaging with the Movin'On ecosystem. I hope to see you next year in Montreal. We hope that that will be possible. And in the meantime, don't forget to check out the different communities of interest that are actually hosted and nourished in the Movin'On ecosystem. I think it is in the interest of all of us to take advantage of that great opportunity to work with peers from across the globe on aspects that are essential to making sustainable transport a reality. Thank you to everyone. Thanks to the organizers for this opportunity of being today with you. And thanks to the speakers. Stay safe, stay healthy. See you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.